All right.
So just to talk a little bit about, I guess, accomplishments is what we're trying to talk about here. So I oh, the lights on? I don't. All right. So I was in the legislature, as Tammy said, I guess it's about 12 years ago, and then I did six years on, 6 years off, and now I'm back for another 2, hopefully 6 years, but 2 at least. But my wife has been in the legislature for 16 years, and the reason she's not with us right now is she's there today. She's the chair of a committee called Executive Departments and Administration, which Tony is a member, and actually he's got we have several. We have Glenn Bailey and others, Jason. But so she's the chair, longtime chair of that committee. She's also the chair of a special committee called GELCAR, which is where she is this morning. And this committee is in charge of administrative rules. So these are rules created by the executive which have the force of law. And so we have a legislative committee to approve them. So she's the chair every other term. And it's very important because unlike the federal government, where they just make their own rules and there is no legislative input, here we have a committee that reads them in a lot of detail and make sure that they do follow the law when they're making rules. Now, let's talk about making laws. So let's talk about the influence of the Free Staters and on the legislature. So it turns out, even though we have 400 reps, maybe 50 at best do work, right? And the others are followers, right? I mean, any organization's going to be like that. And so, it's said that the reward for good work is more work, right? And so, the people like here and Tony and others, we do more work than most, and therefore we have more influence. I mean, it's just that simple. All 3 of us are vice chairs now. My wife is a chair. I think Tony is likely to be a vice chair next time, I would think. Things like that, right? So it's just that's what gives us...
And what's important about the vice chair is considered more of the policy person on the committee. So while the chair makes some of the decisions about how things happen, the vice chair is seen as the policy position. So that's actually very key.
Right. So on my little part of the finance committee, the state budget is so large, we have a larger committee than most, and we break it up into 3 pieces. So I'm on the vice chair of one of the 3 pieces. And so my chair is actually a Democrat. And but I'm the one who makes most of the motions and makes decisions on amendments and things like that, and I'm the one who votes first. Right? So generally speaking, all the other Republicans will vote how I vote, right? Whereas the chair votes last, right? So it's, anyway. All right, let's talk about accomplishments. So my very first term, I would say my biggest accomplishment was the jury nullification language. So that was something, and it was definitely something I attribute at least somewhat to myself, even though was never a member of the Judiciary Committee. But there was a bill to create jury nullification is all about the instructions the judge gives to the jury, right? So can the judge allow the attorney to say to the jury, well, even if this person is technically guilty, if the law itself is unjust, you can say he's not guilty, right? That's what it's about. And so there was a bill to change how the judge's instructions would work, and that was going on consent, ITL. Okay, means inexpedient to legislate, right? It failed, right? We have 2 ways of bills are either ought to pass with amendment, or inexpedient to legislate. So this bill was going nowhere, right? And what I mean by on consent is we have so many bills that when something isn't controversial, committees are 20 people, and when something, the committee thinks 20-0, 19-1, sometimes 18-2, everybody knows how it's going to go, right? So we have a single list at the beginning of every day we meet. All the non-controversial things are on this list, either some to pass, some not to pass, and we vote on them with one vote, right? And any one of us can say, no, that one, let's take that off the list, right? And so this bill, jury nullification, was on the list to go down, okay? And so I looked at that and I said, wait a minute. I'm on the Republican Platform Committee, and because of me, our Republican platform says we want jury nullification. Okay, so I knew something about it. So at the time, we had a large majority. We were fortunate. We had almost 3/4 of the legislature. So I went to the Speaker and I said, look, this is a Republican platform issue. It's going the wrong way here. And he said, okay, I'll take care of it. And so we took it off the consent calendar. We sent it back to the committee with instructions from the Speaker, do something else. They did something else, and the bill passed, okay? So, I feel like that's a win. My other big win is for years and years and years, I've been telling the Ways and Means Committee, get rid of the interest and dividends tax, all right? Because economically, I think it's the worst tax we have. It's a tax on savings and investment, right? So the thing that makes progress, that makes people happier over time, is savings and investment. And so year after year, I said, and nothing, right? Somehow, while I wasn't in, they managed to change it so that it would be phased out. Right, so it started at 5%. The next year it would become 4%, 3%, and so on. That passed 2 years ago. This year, I put into the budget. I made a compromise over something, but I put into the budget that this year, 2024, is the last year. Okay, so the reason that's important, so it'll be phased out 100% in 2025. It's important because we may not be in the majority next year, right? If Trump loses and other problems, we may be back in the minority. It bounces back and forth. But by the time they could fix it, the time they could bring it back, it'll have been completely gone for 6 months, right? So it's so much harder to create something brand new like this than to just say, well, it's 3%, let's make it 4%, so.
Thank you. So.
No. Consent could be, each one has the motion that the committee decides, right? The committee decides we all want this to pass, we all want this to pass with an amendment, we all want this to fail, right? Anybody object to consent? No? Okay. So consent means everybody is unanimous, effectively, right? Yeah. Each bill has its own motion, yeah.
This is very confusing for people.
Am I going to get a turn to speak at some point too? And Erica?
Yeah. Okay. So you have a bill, right? A bill to say whatever, that, red is black. We have a bill, and it goes to the committee, and the committee says, we as a committee make the recommendation that it ought to pass. That is a positive, every bill has to have a finality, right? A thing. And we're unanimous. So it would go on the consent calendar, ought to pass. If the House votes on they always pass the consent calendar. I mean, that's the thing. So that means it's automatically going to pass. Or the committee said, we recommend it's inexpedient to legislate. We want to kill it. It goes on the consent calendar to kill. But that yes vote on the consent makes whatever the action happen. It might be a negative action. It might be to kill a bill or to pass a bill. And it does get confusing because when you have a motion on the floor to on an inexpedient to legislate motion and it fails, now what? Because it didn't pass. It didn't get, so then somebody has to make a subsequent motion. Well, I recommend ought to pass. Because there's got to be a positive action. Something has to get approved. Either the ITL has to get approved, or an ought to pass motion, or a tabling, there's other weird things. So it can get, and it's hairy because it's hard to sometimes follow a bill because the vote, there might be a roll call vote, but the roll call might be on a different part of, it's not easy. It's not easy when you're new either. When you're a new freshman legislator, you're like, what the heck? So it's important to sit next to somebody or live in the same house as the person writing my husband at the time was not my husband, but he was the research director for the NHLA. So he literally wrote the gold standard in my house the first term I was in the house. I had the easiest thing. I never had to worry about how to vote.
So I am Representative Erica Layon. I represent Derry. Way back in 2003 when I was trading options in San Francisco, I was reading this great paper about something called the Free State Project. I'm like, yes, I hope they pick a cool state. They picked New Hampshire. I'm not going anywhere near Massachusetts again. Delete from brain. I ended up moving here for another reason and ended up going to PorcFest in 2008, ended up getting associated with people again, and there are a lot of my people, so that's nice. Even though in any group, there's always people you like, always people that aren't necessarily the ones you get along as well, but that's why it's nice to have free association, even within groups. So I'm Vice Chairman of Health and Human Services. I had been on education my first year. In my first year, I actually had a bill about checklists because I wanted to be efficient with my mailings when I was sending things out to voters. I cleaned the checklist myself, and I knew what we could do so that we would actually have people living in state, still alive, that were on our checklist, and to do it in a pretty easy process. So that actually passed my first year, and the Secretary of State sends the whole list to be checked against the National Change of Address database at least once a year, but they're able to do it more frequently. So we have a bill now this year because some supervisors of the checklist are getting that information but not doing anything with it because they prefer to have a bloated list with dead voters and people who have moved somewhere else on them. So we have a bill that came out of the election committee. It was on the floor yesterday, 10-10. None of the Democrats wanted to make the supervisors do their job, but the Republicans all did. So it passed by one vote. So it's going to the Senate.
In the New Hampshire House right now, the Republicans have a 3-vote majority.
We have a technical majority of, I think, 3.
It's like dead. It's split.
So
every person that doesn't show up
in the House. And there's some people that don't agree with a lot of our positions, too. So this is one of those interesting things. I call it a technical majority, and I act like we're operating from a very small minority. That's just an easier way. What's that?
It's attendance.
attendance is very important.
Yes, it's who shows up. That matters a lot. So with that, just little wins, like making sure the people on the checklist are alive and living in state are big things for Liberty because it makes it harder for people to dilute your vote by a bad vote. I'm on a blow-dry beauty freedom bill. It's going through this year. Did you know to blow dry hair or to apply a makeup at a beauty counter in New Hampshire, you need to be a licensed cosmetologist? It's ridiculous, but these bills have had a really hard time getting through. So this one has moved over to the Senate. It's actually House Bill 644, and it's something that if anybody wants to get involved and help support it, I think that would be fantastic. I'm one of the co-sponsors. Representative Lekis's wife is on there.
I pushed it through, and it needs work because I presented it to the Senate, and my dear Senator Carson thinks that to get a good hairdo, you have to have licensing. Yeah. So she's a Republican who seems to be opposed.
Well, yeah. And so I'll try and take some of those female senators around, go to a beauty counter and realize they can't apply makeup to you in the department stores because you need a cosmetology license. So if you want to learn how to put it on, you have to go to Massachusetts. That's ridiculous. And then I'll also just try and keep it a little bit more limited. We have a bill that's prohibiting unmarked police cars for traffic enforcement, meaning that you can't have an unmarked car lying in wait to catch speeders. There's some options where if there's a pursuit, if they see something that's just really unacceptable, like somebody's swerving, and if they see something that is more extreme, that actually is putting people at specific risk instead of just going a little faster than they should, we do have some exemptions for that because we have a technical majority, not a real majority, and the Senate doesn't believe in liberty quite as strongly as we do, so that should be a next step project in order to make sure that we aren't sending good bills over to die in the Senate. And then probably the last one is my freedom to mow bill. I found out through personal experience that if you have a suspended license, you cannot operate a motor vehicle in the state, not on a way in the state, but anywhere in the state. That means that if you're mowing the lawn when you have a suspended license and they charge you with it, you will spend 7 nights in jail. So I tried to have this go through with a senator in the beginning of this year, just as that straight through bill, and it was blocked. I actually worked with the department. I'm also on GELCAR. I'm not there this morning because I'm committed to doing the cannabis one at 1, and I didn't want to have to leave my business there early because I didn't want to walk out in the middle of the meeting in case it went longer. But through what we did in GELCAR about streamlining some of the rules because they're changing how they handle suspensions, I actually was able to get the full support of the Department of Motor Vehicles in order to change that law that has never been used but sits as a threat over people's heads. So right now, with a technical majority, it's little bites at freedom. But we also have things, too. I mean, we talked about the list. I'm on the list, and I have the bill for legalization of cannabis this year. This is something that I moved forward in a bipartisan way. There had been a commission to do a state-run one that ended up failing. They didn't bring anything forward. So we had a bill that was a lot more similar to what passed resoundingly in the House last year, but then was killed in the Senate. We've moved it to be very tightly state-controlled through rules and regulations so that it meets everything that's been laid out publicly by the governor. But my co-sponsor on that bill that I've been working closely with is a Democrat who had a podcast about the list of anti-democracy extremists. So even when you have people that are saying liberty is great, liberty is awful, you still can work together. And one of the things I'm trying to do is make it so nobody's turning the other side into cartoon villains anymore. Because everybody's built up as these cartoon villains, and we need to realize that we may have philosophic differences, but there are times when we can work together, and we shouldn't be dividing everything so much. So that's my win. I'm going to go talk to her on her podcast about our cannabis bill at Liberty Forum. So let's stop being cartoon villains.
My name is Keith Ammon, and I'm from New Boston, as Tammy said. I'm in my 4th term, so this is my 8th year in the state legislature. It's great to be back at the Crown Plaza, what used to be the Crown Plaza. Coming back here for Liberty Forum brings back a lot of memories, you know. So I moved to New Hampshire in 2009 from outside of Philadelphia. That's where I grew up. And I got involved in politics right away. So I'm going to say this declaratively, and if you disagree with me, you are free to be wrong. The whole point of the Free State Project is to affect policy at the state level, defend policy at the state level. That's the whole point of the Free State Project. So if you're here, if you're thinking about moving here, put that at the top of the list of your goals and do what you can, your small part, to work towards those goals. And in our state, all of the authority comes from Concord, from the capital of the state. So my recommendation is get involved locally, get involved with your town, get involved with a political committee in your town or the town government, run for office locally and work your way up. So that's what I had in mind when we first moved here in 2009. I started on the school board in town. I got involved with the Republican committee in town and worked my way up to getting elected at state rep, one of many state reps. And as Dan said, it takes a lot of work to affect policy at the state level. So I'm currently vice chair of the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee. So that deals with banking, insurance, condominiums for some reason, marijuana. I think any type of commerce. They talk about the stream of commerce. So we try to make commerce as friendly as possible in our state. But I view New Hampshire as the lifeboat. If you think about the way the rest of the world is going, we need a safe haven, and there are different ideas on that. But that's the point of the Free State Project, to have a safe haven, and preparing our state to be somewhat self-reliant. The lifeboat needs to be fortified, and so I look at different subject matters like energy. Our state needs to have strong energy, so I've been working on advanced nuclear. I passed a bill to create a study commission. Mm-hmm. I chaired the commission. We put out a report. The body of the report's about 55 pages or so, and you can find it online on the state website. And we're working on a bill to have our Department of Energy court the advanced nuclear energy industry. And I was just in Dan's committee the other day. Problem. Yeah, and it should go right through. I'm also thinking about currency. Our state needs to have strong currency, right? So that's cryptocurrency. It could be sound money, a gold system. And actually, we got the news that Jim Forsyth passed away. Oh no! Yeah, so Jim was a former state senator. And yeah, so he asked me to put in a bill for him this term, and I did. So I got to spend some time with him.
Amazing man. I know him as a skydiver and as chair of the Ron Paul committee.
He was an Air Force pilot. Yeah. So anyway, you get to meet a lot of great people. He had an accident. Yeah, we can talk about it. Okay. But so if you get elected in the State House, I'll wrap up on this final point. You're not there alone. In other states, you might be the only liberty legislator. For instance, if you're in the Maine legislature, you might be the only one. But when you're in New Hampshire, you are among friends, and not just people that moved here for the Free State Project, but a lot of like-minded individuals, and a lot of the decision in Concord happens behind closed doors. We have public hearings. We do get input from the public, but a lot of the decisions that are made are in a private caucus. And when you have a dozen liberty legislators in that room making those decisions and influencing the outcome of those decisions, it really has a big effect on what comes out of Concord. So I encourage you to get involved politically.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on if it's a committee caucus, right, or if it's
we got 3 hands.
Actually, if I can say one thing building on that, one of the ideas, especially talking with people at PorcFest and other things, the idea of when can we discuss not this massive overgrown government, but what is the proper amount of government. The idea of minarchists and anarchists battling it out with other people and trying to talk about this in something that's not so philosophical. So we're obviously not there, but we're truly debating the importance about whether or not an employer can put constraints on an individual. And we're discussing a lot of these, and it's really shaping what the policy is because we're having these discussions and they're leading the caucus. So I think it's really important to realize that by being involved, your say really matters, and you can have an important pivotal role in freedom in this lifeboat.
Go.
So my taxonomy of the legislature is that we have Republicans, and most of our liberty people are in that Republican group. But you have liberty Republicans, you also have kind of more establishment Republicans, you have some religious Republicans, you have kind of more the populist Republicans. Can you talk a little
I think that's our next group of people. That's it. You don't have to go into
So
such a great detail.
I'll actually say one other thing. I went through all the bills that have been passed in the last couple of years that I see as true liberty bills. There's quite a few of them that are done by Democrats because while they usually have to vote lockstep in order to be reelected, there are issues where we've made things so mainstream in liberty that it's now some Democrats that are moving things forward.
Mark?
So a lot of it is on liquor. So we have, so Jared Sullivan's our representative, and he's pushed so that artists aren't restricted from having alcohol when they're interacting with the public. I don't know all those details. There's other ones about nanobreweries that fall under commerce. All of the therapeutic cannabis is all coming from Democrats because they won't put me on as a co-sponsor. But there are a few other things. That beauty freedom one was split. And it's just really nice to see that there are places we work together, even though they're not given much freedom to vote their conscience in that party.
There was one bill yesterday where the NHLA was one way and the Republicans was the
electric vehicles and parking garages.
parking garage. Yeah. So that went the NHLA way.
Yeah.
For example. So this was a bill to ban electric vehicles from parking garages. Okay, because they're heavy, they're more prone to fire. When the fire happens, they're bad. And the firefighters were up there saying, look, if this goes on fire, we can't necessarily put it out for 6 hours, whatever. So, it could be a problem. But the NHLA point of view is, look, presumably parking garage owners and parking garage customers can work out their business on their own. They don't need our help for that, right? So, if a parking garage wanted to ban EVs, they could do it, right? So that bill had the Democrats and the Liberty people and didn't pass. Right?
Mark?
Yeah, this is somewhat NHLA related, but when I moved for the Free State Project, I had no clue where to move. And like any good American, I bought a house pretty quickly. So I recommend people rent first because you can make the mistake that I made. I moved into a heavily Democrat town, and there was no way, and I declared myself, I'm a Free Stater, I'm here to help. And so they didn't want my help, surprise. And essentially, I did everything sort of wrong in my move. And is there help for people who have not moved to know where to move and how to move for that particular district? If you want to move as a Democrat, I would recommend never saying I'm a Free Stater. If you want to move as a Republican, I think that's fine, but you have to move to the right districts because you could move into a heavily Democrat district or you could move into a Republican district where a Republican's ensconced and he's not going to go. You don't want to get him out.
So that information is available, and I would recommend talking to Melissa and the NHLA. But that's definitely a good consideration. It was like, what are your future goals, and how do you put yourself in the best position to reach them?
I do want to reiterate something that Dan said because I was like, it's so true. So when I served my second term, for a while, I was the vice chair of the Labor and Industrial Rehabilitative Services or whatever. We dealt with the unions. That's just what it's all about. As the vice chair, maybe it was you, Erica, you drive the thing. And it is very important that the first person who votes is your vice chair. And then I had the stare. And I also learned very quickly that if you don't caucus, things don't get done right. And you don't call a vote unless you know what the outcome is. That was the first thing I learned as vice chair is I'm going to caucus and I'm going to know exactly how the bill's going to go before I call it vote. And I had one instance where a very good rep actually now caucused and said he was going to support the bill. And then when it got around the table to him, he voted no. And the daggers, I'm sure. And as soon as the vote was over, I recessed the whatever it's called, executive session, called the caucus, walked in and said, you said you were voting yes. And he said, well, and I go, so now you're going to go out there and you're going to move reconsideration and we're going to vote again. And you're going to vote yes. Because you told me you were voting yes. And he went out and we voted again. And sorry, dude, you don't get to change your mind halfway. You told us yes. That the one thing you learn as a legislator is you come in with one thing that you still leave with, and that's your word. Doesn't matter who you are, you can't say you're going to support something and then not support it. If you tell the NHLA you're going to vote a certain way, if you don't, they're going to know it, and they're coming and telling you said you would vote a certain way. So these guys talked about all sorts of little bills. So when we were first talking, I'm like, what were the big needle bills? Like, what were the big changes? Very briefly, did anybody mention constitutional carry?
So I think it was very briefly mentioned by Melissa, but we actually did have an important cleanup bill on constitutional carry because we hadn't changed the language on OHRV or snowmobile when it was initially passed. So we did have a bill that I believe it was last year. It's somewhere on my list here. An off-highway recreational vehicle.
A four-wheeler.
So four-wheelers, that sort of thing. As long as it's not being used for work and it has four wheels and it's sort of a play vehicle, that's what it is. It's like a snowmobile on wheels. So that passed in 2022. And, it's one of those things about the changeover in the House. Most of the people who were sponsors on that are no longer in the House. Some because they've retired, some because...
John Burt, I think, was the sponsor.
Yeah, John Burt was a sponsor on that one.
Another very big one, and there are 2 sessions on this specific topic tomorrow afternoon, school choice.
Yeah.
So
we have probably the best school choice program in the country right now, and it is making the Democrats insane.
We just increased the limit on it.
Yeah. So we started, Titus?
Sorry, we actually had... sorry.
They for those not living in New Hampshire...
I can talk about it.
Can you go back? I was going to just talk about Jim Forsythe for one second.
Yes.
So back in the day, so I'm thinking this was like 2013, Jim Forsythe was a state senator, and he put in a bill and pushed it through, creating, education tax credits. And what that did is, I'm going to give you a bad synopsis. If you owe the state any taxes, business profits tax, business enterprise tax, interest and dividends eventually, if you are going to write a check to the state, you could instead take 85% of that $10,000 you owe the state and give it to the Children's Scholarship Fund or network or whatever it was, and they would give that money to school kids to go to private schools. So 85% of your business taxes could go directly to homeschoolers and private schools and things like that. That's where we started chipping. Yeah. And
so the 2 big wins that we had were in 2021 in the budget was education freedom accounts, which is one where you're reporting back to the Children's Scholarship Foundation, and then that goes back to the state with anonymized data. And so that one is expanded to 350% last year, and now it looks like it's going up to 500%. But also, we have a really, really important distinction to make sure that if you don't want the government in your business, you are a 193A homeschooler. And we also had a bill that I sponsored in 2022 that just went through those rules and removed some unnecessary burdens that were in that. So we're strengthening both the leave me alone homeschooling and those who want to get back some of their tax money and get that amount that would follow their kid to the school, so that you have both of those pathways. Both of them have the people that love them, and we're defending both.
Tony?
Just briefly, my wife, Alicia Lekis, is also state rep. She's not here this morning because she's on the special committee to investigate the response to COVID, which is meeting right now. She'll be here later today, but she was one of the champions of the FA program and a number of the bills, and so if you want to talk, she'll be around later today and tomorrow to talk.
Someone had a hand. Did you have a hand? Titus.
Yeah, Mr. Ammon, you mentioned nuclear energy. I think cheap energy is giving you a competitive advantage on nearly everything. But the perception is, or my perception was, that advanced nuclear energy issues and nuclear energy issues are regulated on a federal level. So mostly. So what can the state do in this regard to make it easier for nuclear startups to come to New Hampshire?
Yeah, so you're correct about that. We're actually meeting with someone from a federal program on Monday at the State House. There's a program called GAIN, Gateway for Acceleration and Innovation in Nuclear, or something like that it stands for. So it's basically putting out the signpost that we're a nuclear-friendly state. In our grid, we have about, I think, 6 states are in our ISO New England grid, and 4 of them have bans on future nuclear power build-out. So Connecticut and New Hampshire do not. So we have that advantage regionally. Just making sure our regulators are inviting to, people that want to invest in these projects, and the federal government is pushing for new forms of regulation to accelerate advanced nuclear. So, you're right that things are happening at the federal level, but our state can be a magnet for that industry, and we can be part of the supply. We have, the university system could get involved. We could have workforce. Westinghouse produces parts for nuclear power plants in the town of Newington, so we could leverage that that home court advantage. So that's the goal.
Don't we have a specific, there's different versions of nuclear that you're allowed to get certified for? I know I'm saying it in the layman's terms, but we're V4, whereas not all nuclear plants are able to perform at that level, but ours is.
So there's Generation 3, which is what Seabrook is, and then there's Generation 3 Plus, which is there's a plant in Georgia called Vogtle they just launched. So that's and then there's Generation 4, which is on the horizon. So they get smaller, they get hopefully cheaper to build and run. They're built in factories and delivered by the main parts are built in factories, delivered by truck, assembled in a few months, and they're safer. So that's the main thing.
Didn't we pass in the body pass something to approve that in New Hampshire? Isn't that already pre-approved? So if it did want to come here?
Yeah, we're working with the Department of Energy. They're going to create a new position to focus on advanced nuclear. So that's what we're working on right now. Yeah.
Yes.
Where do you see your opposition to the nuclear?
So Seabrook is our nuclear power plant. It's a 1.25 gigawatt plant, so it's a fairly good sized plant. It was supposed to have 2 reactors built, but they only built 1. Part of it was construction cost overruns, but another piece of it was this group called the Clamshell Alliance, I think it was called, right? The Clamshell Alliance. And some of those guys are still around and living, but they're on their way, to the next plane. So we have this.
We're going to win by attrition.
Yeah, we're going to win by attrition. We have this group of activists. Their whole identity is that they stopped the second plant at Seabrook from being built. That's the opposition. The Republicans are all on board, and the younger Democrats are on board. So we passed a bill on a voice vote that was nuclear related, and there's still some holdouts that are probably in their 70s. Yeah, so.
The one thing I'm going to jump back to the gun thing for a second because I'm going to get it all wrong. Didn't we also pass a law that says that we're not going to enforce federal gun bans?
Yes.
So
yes,
we have a nullification, basically. We're you can have your federal law.
Yeah,
we're not going to enforce it, though.
We have federal nullification laws, both on any new gun laws based on a certain point in time. I think it was the end of last session. We also have a federal nullification on COVID vaccine requirements. And actually, just it's headed over to the Senate. We have a Firearm Purchaser Privacy Act saying that you can't use those vendor codes, those merchant codes, to identify your purchases as firearms ammo or firearms accessories in the state. So that one is House Bill 1186. Jan Bryn is the prime sponsor on that, and that's an important one to support because Big Brother tracking the ammo that you buy, you don't want to have to use it.
Take that
Whatever you want to do.
New Hampshire was always open carry
Yeah.
up until this weekend. So if you had It was very confusing. So if you carried your gun openly, you did not need any kind of, we didn't have a license, we had a permit. It was a very strange thing. But if you wanted to carry concealed, you had to get this permit. But it was a shall issue permit. It wasn't, well, I'm just saying it wasn't like a long, most people, unless you had a real reason, got approved. You might have had a fight with your police chief a little bit about it, but they got and they had to do it in like 7 days or something. So it's not like a lot of states. But now you can do either.
The very first bill that Governor Sununu signed into law was the constitutional carry. So he made a big statement on his very first action.